Welcome, everyone. I am really glad to be here with my friend Nhien. We connected first a few years ago when I was first getting started with New Eden, and I think you were just getting started with Evolving Enneagram too. And then we sort of, life happened and we didn't connect again for a little while, and we've been reconnecting again with this project on Mighty that some of you are familiar with, where we are taking seriously some of the concerns that have come up around the major social media companies, in particular Meta and Facebook, and the way that they are influencing the world and the minds of people, and in particular contemplatives. And I didn't even know I was going to start here, but here we go. I had a moment where I was sharing with some of my dear friends in chapel, and we were talking about the algorithms and the way they're changing and the way they're becoming more predatory and less about getting people the right info and more about getting people to think what you want and say, and we just felt a bit like our online community centered in Facebook was being tossed around and manipulated in ways that we didn't like. And all of a sudden, the phrase "to sell your soul to the devil" is not something I would ever say in any kind of like serious way, but it popped into my head, and I was like, "What?" And then I thought about it, and I was like, "What is my soul other than like my attention and and all my subconscious thoughts and all of this stuff that actually is what these big social media companies are taking from us and directing and usurping our attention." And I felt this deep call as a contemplative that a contemplative community can't be hosted on a platform that is designed to manipulate our attention. Otherwise, we're just sort of setting ourselves up for failure.
Mm.
And anyway, so I started this project, and Nhien has been a huge help and a huge friend and a wonderful person and advisor, and support and teammate. And yeah, so we've been working on that a lot. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Nhien. I'll let you introduce yourself and all that kind of thing, and tell us where you're coming from and what you're about, and what you'd like to bring to the table for our chat today.
Yeah. Well, I am a licensed and ordained interspiritual unity minister, and we can talk a little bit about what that means. Unity is a non-dual tradition that is rooted in the teachings of the Bible, but a more allegorical interpretation. So that's the kind of the foundation of my work. I'm also a twice certified Enneagram teacher. I'm IEA, International Enneagram Association, accredited with distinction teacher. And I'm the founder of Evolving Enneagram. So those are just some of my like background pieces. I can also share just very briefly that personally, I think part of why we've connected is that I consider myself a contemplative. I offer a contemplative approach to the Enneagram. But it's actually rooted in my own personal practice as well. And so part of joining in this Mighty Networks community, I think, comes from that desire among fellow leaders of contemplative communities to build something together that is rooted in, I would say, intentionality, right, around our attention, if you will. And so that's so important because as you were talking, I was thinking about terms like hijacking attention
Yeah.
and in ways that a part of why I love the Enneagram so much is the understanding of how much attention. And, I think I wake up every morning and I'm making very conscious decisions about what I focus on and what I do, only to realize, a good 80% is like unconsciously driven. And the Enneagram has helped me over the years in understanding that unconscious terrain of how attention can particularly get hijacked depending on my Enneagram type. So it's like an interesting piece around that.
Mhm.
And then, yes, looking at social media now, especially the most popular forms of social media, and how based on a very capitalistic perspective that makes sense given that they are businesses, what makes the most money? Oh, well, our attention gets focused on negativity, actually. Like the human brain for survival purposes focuses on that. So the algorithms are like beep, 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 let's give them more of that. And
Mm.
so it's like if we want our attention to be continually biased in that way, in this loop, right, then the existing prevalent social media like Facebook does that. And I'm not making it wrong. I mean, within its framework, it does what it's trying to do, you know?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to live consciously? What does it mean to then take, again, it's almost like our souls back and say, this is how I will place my attention. And I think our effort in Mighty Networks is an attempt to find a place where, I mean, I'm looking at my feed and I'm like, oh, I just read an article that was so inspiring. I'm like, oh, that's fake. That's AI. AI generated that article. I'm like, you're kidding. Like I can't even like filter out for that. I was like kind of stunned by
Mm.
that. I'm like, I better say I don't want to see more of these or else because I clicked on it, I will keep seeing more of them because I clicked on it. And so it's just fascinating to see that loop and how through your vetting of what is on Mighty Networks, our shared intentionality around it, that we can offer each other a, hey, is this what we want to focus on instead? How do we focus on the
Yeah.
divine? How do we focus on our souls lives, our inner lives? How do we awaken more fully to that and basically offset, uh, I would say, the pattern of our personality type and offset the patterning of our social, the gravitational pull of social media today.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit. I don't know if you have anything to say to that before I share anything more.
Yeah, no, I think it's right on. Before, well, before my internet and computer crashed, we had talked, and Ian and I had spoken briefly about Evagrius of Pontus, um, and his connection with the Enneagram and all of that. Just briefly to wonder if it was worth talking about. But when you were saying the way that our attention is hijacked and what we care about, I think is almost, maybe, I don't think you quite use that word, but I think that's what you're getting at. Is it's directing not only our attention but our desire and our subconscious desire, not just like, oh, I want to buy this, but like there's this sort of attachment. I feel like I'm like, oh shoot, where's my phone? Like if I leave it in the other room, just going to get a sandwich or something. I never cared about my phone like that when I was a kid. It's this whole other thing. And Evagrius talks a lot about our desires and our passions. And when you were saying that negativity grabs our attention, from an evolutionary perspective, as a survival mechanism, because when there's danger you want to notice it and that's a good thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
um, Evagrius would say that that's our passions, that part of us that has that animal response. And he says, and this is language that maybe we could unpack. My viewers will be more familiar with what I mean by the word demon, but it's not something
Got
like
it.
it's a
Yes, I
psychological. Well, you were saying the allegorical interpretation, so you're probably right on board. He would say one of his favorite lines, or one of my favorite lines from Evagrius, is when he says, "The demons stir up our passions."
mm,
And so the passions are almost like this sort of neutral thing, but there's this more cognitive, more thought-based part that is stirring up those passions. And I think
mm,
that's where the social media is coming in, is through that cognitive, thought-based place, and it's feeding us with all these ideas that should make us angry and should make us afraid, if they were immediate situations, but they're not. And they, yeah, I think they're using that to sell us advertising space, or to sell our attention as advertising space, the new
mm,
billboard in our
mm.
pockets.
Yeah, yeah. And As you bring this up, I mean, I appreciate that I am not an expert in, and waver between Evagrius and Evagrius, if you
I
have a
don't know either.
preference.
I just throw them
Hey,
both out there.
Evagrius, the Desert Fathers and Mothers, right? Like this era, I want to say that it's great in a way that you don't know as much about the Enneagram because here's the thing. Enneagram personality types are defined by two things, and I feel
Mm,
like you just named them without naming them. The two things are what is your passion and
mm,
what is your fixation? The passion
mm,
being the heart's habit of attention, and then the fixation being the mental habit of
yeah.
attention for the type. And that's actually what defines the type, not all the behavioral descriptions we might see on the internet saying, oh, you do this a lot, you must be this type. And that's the more superficial. Behavior is the more superficial caricature of like Enneagram types, but like the root is this loop that we go in. So I might even say that the fixation is what you might call the demon, and then the passion is literally it's from basically the history of the Enneagram. It includes different threads, and one of them being the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and the word passion deliberately or
Mhm.
intentionally coming from that, and coming from the root word passio, which means the suffering
Yeah.
of the type, the
Mhm.
suffering of the person. So it's interesting that you mentioned that. And the idea and the way that I teach the Enneagram is that they're essentially, and this is rooted, I want to give credit where it's due, the work of A.H. Almus, whose real name is Hamid Ali. A.H. Almus is his pen name. He wrote Facets of Unity and Keys to the Enneagram. And he basically describes around the circle of the Enneagram, which like represents our wholeness, that each of us has like lost sight. We were born into this world having lost sight of one facet of God, one face of God, or one facet of unity is how he calls it from the non-God lingo, one facet of that reality. And so the way I teach the Enneagram is having lost sight of this, not actually having lost it, but having lost in consciousness, this connection to this like facet of the divine. We're like, oh shoot. Like it's like we have to hustle to create an identity for ourselves. And there are nine flavors of how we do that based on one of the nine aspects of our unity or our wholeness that we've lost sight of. We call those aspects the holy ideas. So the Enneagram of holy ideas, very different from the Enneagram of personality. It's almost like the Enneagram of wholeness, the Enneagram of the divine, the objective Enneagram. And it's like depending on what you've lost sight of along the number, like there's a compensatory egoic structure that develops, and that becomes our personality type. And so the fixation of that passion of like, if I keep this emotional habit and this mental fixation, and there's like a feedback loop there, then I will find what I'm missing. Each type says, like my worth, lovability, security as the spirit as the ground of being, whatever it is. But the type structure looks outward, looks to the world to try to find that thing. And then in that futility, right? It becomes hungry and hungry. It's like the appetite where, as we see it in media, it's like um, from that place of not enoughness, nothing will make you feel enough, right? No amount of things you buy online or no amount of fame, whatever it is, no amount of outer security helps you to feel that. And so the root of why I use the Enneagram is to say, hey, there are nine different faces of how this is done. And when I know what yours is, I can tell if you're doing a spiritual bypass. I can tell, like for instance, type nines on the Enneagram are their compensatory structure is to fall asleep to its own like agendas and need, like fall asleep to itself, numb out. So you can imagine centering prayer, which is my primary spiritual practice and the one we teach in the Evolving Enneagram. Nines can use centering prayer as a way to further check out, not to be engaged. And if they're not careful, they can't tell the difference because they're so used to this blahness that, oh, cloud of unknowing, oh, this is perfect. I'm just going to go into this blissful nothingness without recognizing that this is a numbing out that's very different from actually opening to mystery, etc. So that's how, like the Enneagram, understanding your type helps us to see, oh, how we get lost, you know? And also some of our spiritual gifts. I can talk about that as well. But yeah. And so even, I don't want to demonize like social media. I mean, it's all made by people, humans, right?
Yeah.
But there's like a way we get lost and we get lost further. And then I think some of these material outer structures are ways that that lostness gets concretized in institutions or ways of being societally that then when we follow those ways lead us further and further away from our souls and our truth, you know, like even unintentionally, not like we're like, hey, there's the devil over there, let's go, but we're like, we just, this seems like the way, this seems like where I'll find wholeness, this seems like where I'll find love, whatever it is. Yeah. So,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's that ancient idea that no one does evil on purpose, that everyone thinks they're doing good and they're just wrong. And sometimes they're terribly, terribly wrong. And I don't
yes,
mean to
yes,
justify any evil.
right.
But
Yeah.
it comes from a misplaced understanding of the good because
Yeah.
everyone desires the good. Um, Everyone desires what is good, yeah. They're just confused about where to find it and what's best and what's important. Like, to go back to what we care about. And all of that can be wrapped up in ignorance. And so there's this old idea in pre-Christian tradition, going back to Plato and taken thoroughly into at least the forms of Christianity which inspire me. This idea of evil is privation, that any sin is an ignorance and a mistake, and that includes all the demons. And so that the idea being then that every demon is a fallen angel. God doesn't make demons. God makes angels, and then angels get confused and they become demons.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we talk about our inner demons, like in the movies, you'll see that classic caricature of little angel on one shoulder
Yes.
and little devil on the other. Do the good thing, do the bad thing, and the person's wrestling with themselves. And that's a caricature, but it's actually in many ways a helpful image to understand how the language of demons was understood, because it was a pattern of thought and a habit that leads towards destruction. Whereas an angel, and in our angels of our better nature, there's that expression, the angels of our better nature, are habits that lead towards goodness, towards beauty and truth, and all of those sorts of things. And so the Enneagram seems like it's got the same project as Evagrius, who's the first one to categorize the 8 thoughts, and then everybody sort of took it from him. But
Oh,
he,
we didn't even name those. If you could name the 8 thoughts, I can correlate them with the Enneagram if you'd like to.
yeah, we could, yeah, we could correlate them. We could talk about their shortcomings. We could talk about their gifts. I study and am inspired by these things, but don't in any way find myself beholden to them. So as we talk about them, I just want to put that caveat out there that sometimes I'll say, well, okay, I'm not sure about this one. But to present them as they are, they begin from the body and they move to the spirit. So it's the most embodied to the least embodied. And in some ways, that's those 2 parts you were talking about, the passion and the fixation, which fits very well with Evagrius. Yeah, he would call it a vice. But it's that habitual pattern of fixating on what's destructive. So it moves from mostly passion to mostly vice in the spectrum of 8 as you go through each one. And so the first one then is gluttony, is the way it's usually translated, overeating. And so that's of the body, it's of the animal nature very much. And then after that is usually translated fornication. Although for Evagrius and the Desert Fathers, it wasn't an obsession with particular sexual acts like we often think it is. It was about sex being something that distracts us from prayer. and they had some bad views on it, and I don't agree with everything they said, but I want to give them a little bit of credit that wasn't as bad as we think it was, even though it was the ancient world, and so they had all kinds of problems to work through. And then after that, you have avarice, which is greed, but it's specifically greed for money and wealth. So it's not the same as gluttony, because gluttony, and the way they distinguish those, often they'll say gluttony has a natural end. You eat until you're full. But avarice, the desire for wealth, has no end. There is no natural end. It's this constant, endless consuming, and it resembles in some way gluttony, but it's not as much of the animal nature. And they would often, the Desert Fathers and other church writers would say, we don't see this in the animal world. We see gluttony in the animal world. We see the desire to eat too much and even to fight others and to take all the food and whatever, but not this desire to accumulate abstract value beyond our own satisfaction. Even once we've met all of our sensual desires, we still want more and more and more. So that's avarice. And then it goes into sadness. And we talked about how, you and I just before the recording, about how fear is seen as part of sadness in Evagrius's tradition. So sadness is the category, but fear is a common thing that they address in that category. And so, and that, I think that's because sadness is a loss. It's a sense of grief, and fear is about that grief, whether that grief in the future. It's a projecting that grief into the future, and so it's like a subcategory of sadness for them. And then anger follows sadness. Depending on the Desert Father, Cassian switches sadness and anger. It goes anger and then sadness, and Evagrius goes sadness and then anger. And then in anger, yeah, so anger is seen as a passion that blinds our inner eyes. It takes away our discernment. And so it's not really about shaming people for being angry so much as it is recognizing that when we're angry, we don't think clearly. Even though sometimes we see super clearly all of a sudden. But I don't think that the anger gives us that. I think, the anger comes up from what we've seen. We see clearly and then we get angry. The anger doesn't give us the clarity. I agree with them on that anyway. And then they move from anger into vanity. Vanity and then pride. And in our modern world, those two things are usually the same, and we don't understand the difference. Oh, I skipped acedia. Sorry. Acedia is in between anger and vanity, and that's a word that doesn't exist in English and doesn't have a proper translation. It's like boredom, but it's also like anxiety and restlessness and hopelessness and futility. And one of my favorite images for describing acedia is they say the monk walks out of his cell and watches the sun go through the sky, hoping it will set soon.
Mm.
And
Wow.
that's the feeling of acedia, of this is pointless and stupid, and I'm bored and I want to get out of here. And you don't want to hear anything, you can't be told anything, but not because you're prideful, just because like everything's pointless and hopeless. And then they get into vanity, and vanity, as opposed to pride, is about image, vainglory. And so one of the ways I like to distinguish between vanity and pride is to say that a vain person doesn't care if they're right. They only care how they're perceived. And so they will lose an argument if it makes them look humble. Whereas a prideful person doesn't care what they look like. They only care about being right, and they're sure that they're right, and they know that they're right. And that's what pride is that certainty of your own rightness and your own correctness, and the unwillingness to hear anything else or have humility.
Is that as presented by Evagrius, or is that your
I mean,
doctrine?
that's my in the moment describing it, but I
Oh,
think
got
I'm
it.
being true to Evagrius there.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Curious. Yeah, because
yeah,
of course, I'm overlaying everything with the Enneagram right now. So,
yeah,
so as I
yeah.
listen,
So that's the 8. I don't know how much detail to give, but how does that land? Does that match the 9?
yeah, yeah. So I can go over all nine of them briefly. So I think you started with gluttony, I believe. Um, and so gluttony is associated with the type uh, 7 on the Enneagram. And, as you're talking, I was like, yeah, I can see how. it kind of got rooted, it was rooted in the work of Evagrius, but definitely has evolved to its own space. Maybe even
Mhm.
before I share all this, because God, so much of our world is already about like you're wrong, you're sinful, this and that. And I want to just reaffirm what you said earlier, which I happen to also believe. I mean, it's Matthew Fox who popularized creation spirituality, who basically says we were not born in original sin, at
Mm.
least in
Yeah.
the regular definition of it, but in original blessing.
Mm.
And actually, that's what I teach, and that's the place from which I live and serve, right?
Mhm.
This fundamental belief in fundamental like divinity and wholeness and perfection in all
Mhm.
people. And like in our Unity seminary, we studied the notion that the word sin derives from the archer missing the mark. Again, error, the idea of ignorance and error
Mhm.
rather than on something fundamental to your nature as like bad or evil that needs
For
to be
sure.
expunged. And so I see all of these passions,
Mhm.
vices as ways we got lost. And I want to name that as I'm saying
Mhm.
these things of like, oh, gluttony, like let me tell you about gluttony. And so, from that framework, I want to say that again, one way we get lost, one way we don't know that we have enough is gluttony. Right? One way we don't know this foundational like connection to the abundance of the universe. And so sevens have this way of the way we interpret gluttony for the seven isn't so much more of everything. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The seven energy is equated with this like it's not here, so I'm going to keep going after it. And so it's more about a little bit of everything from the potluck of life
Mm.
and but never resting in the present moment because the next new thing is really the pain point of the seven. That's the seven thinks, oh, we're just having fun here. We're just racing to the new thing, but without the capacity to be present where you are, you as the seven are sitting in your vacation, planning your next vacation, unable to be present to the gift of the moment. So that's the pain of that point. And then I think
That sounds like acedia. If I can just drop that in, that feels like a combo with acedia in it.
interesting, interesting.
Yeah.
So maybe, yeah, some of these flavors, the way we break up the spectrum of colors and emotions is different.
Yeah.
So and yeah, and so when you went to lust, and also I want to say that we see them as equal, meaning everyone is equally if you look at the Enneagram, it's a circle, and every point is equidistant from the center. So we don't see it as any particular passion being further removed from the spiritual. It's like that all of them are ways that we um, disconnect from our spiritual nature or don't feel the connection to our spiritual nature. And then so lust happens to be that for the number eight. And the way we construe it is exactly that. It's not just about sex. It's about the way eights hold it is there's a very animalistic aspect to my being and there's a very material sense of if a little is good, more is better. Like lustiness, like a lust for life, even. But again, moving toward the material, and it doesn't have to be sexual. It could be just anything in life, depending on the specific category. So there's a lustiness out that is outward, that is grabbing, that goes out in the world and takes for itself. Again, in the pain point of like that particular number. So the third, remind me what third one was.
Um, it goes gluttony, fornication. Oh, avarice. So greed for
Avarice.
money. Yeah.
Yes. So avarice is connected to actually one of the head types, which is the type five on the Enneagram. And the type five has this belief in a way that I'm so separate, like I am an island. And so avarice, the way we characterize it, comes from this sense of if I'm separate, I'm not connected to like resource. And I'm an observer of the world. It's almost like here's my island, and to go all the way over here, it's a lot of work. So like fives have this head like avarice that says the world gives too little and takes too much. And so there's this holding on to what little I think I have. They might be the ones who have a very stoic life. It's not necessarily like avarice in the sense of like give me more money. It's let me just minimize my needs And I could say, I'm guessing a lot of contemplatives who are like, oh, there, it's the, I can live with nothing. I'll minimize what I need so that you don't expect anything from me. And fives have this head type orientation toward gathering knowledge. And so some of the avarice is about like more knowledge, more information, and a kind of hoarding of that as well. And that being the way it like it doesn't show up for life. Like the soul gets lost in that sort of, it's almost like sitting behind the castle walls looking at uh picture books of life rather than actually like engaging in life. That's what we see in ours. And again, normally I go around based on a certain order. I'm going around based on your order here, so it's a little
Mhm.
bit jumping around.
Yeah,
But yeah, so we
interesting.
see that in fives, but we see it, it's like that you will replace knowledge for wisdom. And this knowledge is colder. It's like I'm the detached observer of life, and somehow I'm going to awaken or find my salvation through this learning. But no amount of learning or acquiring of information gets you there. So academics, professors, it's like that's the stereotype of the five. Okay, what's the fourth one?
Then it goes to sadness,
Okay, sadness.
sadness and
Sad,
fear.
yes. Okay, sadness is normally equated with the four. Um, and but as a melancholy or as a longing. And so that's this type that feels like somehow I've lost connection with the God as the original source, the origin of all things. And I will create my own origin, like I being original coming from that. Like fours have this thing of like there's something I'm missing that I cannot name, a longing that I cannot name like what that is. And so within the type structure, there's this seeking in the world to be like if I can just craft this special thing, I will have it. But again, if the structure is related to focusing on what it's missing, what it's longing for rather than what it has, there's a sense of like perpetual underlying sadness within the type structure. Yeah, so again, not knowing that it's within ourselves, but maybe in that romance or maybe in that exquisite Parisian vacation or in that artwork that I will find it. There's this sense, right? And yes, so that's sadness. What's next?
Anger.
Anger. Okay. So anger is actually related to it is considered the passion of the type one on the Enneagram. And the type one, it wouldn't be obvious. Type ones are often called the perfectionists or the reformers on the Enneagram, but they have this coming into the world from this orientation of nothing is good. Like we have to make things good. So to make things good, I'm going to notice what's wrong with things. So a one will come in the room and notice what is wrong, right? So they can make it better. And so they can be highly critical of themselves and others. And a lot of ones are like, how is this anger? The way we see it is well, definitely there's a righteous anger, and the anger being like a way we stand against reality as it is. It's like, no, it's like this is not what things should be, as if ones know that, right? And so there's this perpetual sort of like frown that ones can live in, where again the type structure is like that. And then even ones approaching the divine are like, oh, we will put order and goodness into this. And so ones can be complicit in this. If you follow all the rules and go by the order, then we will have goodness in the world, right? No space for chaos or messiness or what humanity is comprised of, a lot of repressing of that which feels animal and messy and not perfect and orderly, right? Not corrected. And so we can even see different religions who that orient toward, oh, if you follow the rules, like there's a lot of that in the one energy. So what's next?
Then it would be acedia, the hard one, the
Ah,
boredom, hopelessness.
yes, yes. I'm not sure what one that relates to. I mean, arguably, maybe the four has been related to that instead of the four sadness. So let's put that aside for a moment. I'm sure I'm sure there's someone who has like connected the two, but let's
Mm.
put that aside and
Yeah.
I'll draw that up at the very end. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a weird one. And then
Yeah.
after that is vainglory,
Yeah.
vanity. Yeah.
Very clear one.
Yeah.
And to the humility. Okay, are we allowed to say both of us
Sure.
have that? Yes. Yes. And okay, so vainglory and again, the compassionate view of all of these is this is a point of suffering. It is as if the three type structure is connected to vainglory. We call it vanity in our modern times. Is this fundamental belief that my worth, that your worth is not intrinsic. It must be earned. Like it's not just God given. And even if I believe that in terms of my metaphysics and my spirituality, but do I believe that as I live every day? Do I believe I need to earn worth? Like, do I believe I need to curate something that is worthy? And so that's like the deep pain of the three. That's like, oh, who I am naturally is not good enough, but who I can become, who I can make myself into, and even convince myself that I am, that's like the root of the three. It's almost like throwing an image of itself out before it and trying to become that image of what it thinks is a valuable person. And so then, but what happens is the three gets lost in its image, can forget of like, oh, how I seem then becomes a substitute for what I am, how I seem versus how what I am. So we can judge that as, oh, our society is so three. America is very three, that is focused on image. But if we see the root of it as being like, oh, when we start to know that I have innate worthiness and I don't have to earn it and I don't have to have it mirrored back to me from the outside, right? It's innate, it's not externally given. Then that image becomes less important to sustain, right? The three can still have the capacity to go, oh, yeah, we can make things look beautiful or put together, but that doesn't mean that is the source of our worth. Like when the three begins to heal, that's kind of what happens. But the three, more than any other number, forgets who it is for the image that it believes, that person believes it should become and be, and then places more value in curating that image than in spending time nurturing the authenticity of the soul. So that's the threes piece in that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think two is next. Did you say pride was next?
Yeah.
Okay. So the pride in the type two is actually the pride of I'm not human. The sense of like, I know better than you. Because twos are like, how can I be prideful? I help everyone. I'm such a good person. The twos have that identity. They focus on other people's needs before their own. But the idea is that it is very prideful to believe that you don't have needs, that others do, but you do not, and that you know what's good for others more than they do. That it's usurping God's role in that. It's like that idea that like I know better, and so I play God in that way. And so if when you see it that way, twos can see the way that they're prideful, and at the same time, that pride comes from this deep interiority that says, I am not lovable. Like as I am. I mean, the two's virtue is humility of saying, oh, like my needs matter. I am lovable. And if I own that, then the pride actually goes down to say, I am like everyone else. I am like you. True humility, not putting yourself as below, but equal to all humans to say, oh, okay. And then I am not the dispenser then of like your needs. And so that compulsion to give, which unconsciously is about if I give to you, and my needs aren't important, but if I give to you, maybe you will meet my needs. So a lot of twos fall into the trap of giving to get appreciation, giving to make sure that their resources are kept by having this great relationship from this person that they give to. That's the underground of the two. On the surface, you're like, oh my God, these people are just running around helping everybody, but inside there is this deep belief that like I'm not lovable if I don't, if I'm not needed, you will leave me. you know, and so, and then I can't be needy because that'd be the worst thing, right? And so twos have that difficult relationship to needs. And again, this is the most like superficial, you know, we're just briefly going around
Yeah.
type structures that are very dense. So I believe I've hit one, two, three, four, five. Ah, okay, we'll skip six for now. Seven, eight, and nine. Ah, okay.
Yeah. Is
They
six
might.
fear? Is that?
Oh, I'm going to equate nine. Yes, that's sixes of here. You're right.
Yeah.
So let's save acedia for nine, even if maybe some people would flip it nine and four. So I'm open to that. If you're listening and you know the Enneagram, I'm open to flipping those two. But here's let's do six first. So the one that Evagrius left out or included in sadness was something that the Enneagram really parses out as a fear-based type. And it's interesting because six, the root of the six, is not like the one. The six notices what could go wrong. So the one I told you earlier notices what is wrong in the present moment. The six future trips and has this idea that there's no grounded being, there's no security in the world. So the six's ego structure is designed to build security. Some people might say, oh, well, that's so much more noble, building security than establishing an image like the three does, right? But we see this as all equal. They're all rooted in lack of connection to like spirit as the source of your being, to say, I have to secure my future. So the six's orientation looks to the future and looks at what could go wrong so they can prevent it. Fear of loss, essentially. Fear of loss. And so the structure is then forward thinking, but generally isn't hopeful, isn't faithful. And in fact, the virtue of the six as the six develops is faith. And like there's the holy idea is that of faith, right? And the virtue is actually that of courage. The heart space is filled with courage, and the fixation changes into like knowing of holy strength and holy faith as they understand that, oh, no amount of worldly security. I mean, at the extreme, a six might be the one hoarding material goods because they don't feel secure, right? But no amount of outer security is going to get you a sense of that inner stability. That spirit is the ground of your being. That's what a six needs to learn along the spiritual path. So we've gone through all but the final one, and nines who already feel overlooked often will be like, I'm the last one, last and best. The nine is at the crown of the Enneagram. And what's interesting is that the nine type structure is that which is self-forgetting. And I could equate it with acedia because there's this like outer positivity that says, oh, yeah, life is good. But inside, there's a belief that I do not matter, like a deep, like despondency in life, like a deep, like, and so nine strategies, I don't matter. Well, I need to merge with what does, or I need to medicate. So nines are the ones most likely to numb out, whether it's through addictive, like couch potato stuff, or they can numb out by attaching to someone who's more assertive, right? Like it could be people where the nines most likely to say it's fine, and you ask them what they want, like where they want to go to dinner, sort of like, I don't know, like you pick. You're like, there's a going with the flow of life that doesn't assert the soul's like individuality, that is so afraid if I assert, then I'm separate, right? And then I'm separate from the good. I of myself am not worthy. It's like darkness. It's like the sun shines everywhere. And the sun is shining. The night's like, yeah, positivity. The sun is shining. Oh, but it doesn't shine on me. And so that's how I can see some of the potential like sense of like utter like to stave off that utter despondency. Like there is this just going with the flow of life and not having to face one's own interiority to know what do I actually want? Because to face it is to face that degree of darkness that feels like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, like none of this matters. And so the idea in contemplative enneagram work is that we journey into first confronting the egoic structure to illuminate it, not to demonize it, make it bad, but to see it, to see that there's a lens through which we're seeing the world. That's construction, to see the construct. Deconstruction is that path of dropping down, facing the existential angst and fear within all of us. And then we have this path of reconstruction that is like, oh, that's none of our business. We don't remake ourselves. That's the business of grace and the divine, and from the spiritual surrender that is the path of contemplation. And so this idea that each of us seeks in the outer something, and the futility of that, of the material of the world offering what it is we think we need, turning within instead, and turning within to honor that in this contemplative path, I'm not making a new self. I'm not transforming myself, but I am surrendering. I'm opening in this apophatic journey of like letting go to allow something else to reform or reshape or transform my consciousness, so that the place from which I live and move and have my being in the world feel centered not in the personality but in the spirit. And so that's the journey from an Enneagram, contemplative Enneagram perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I thank you for sharing that. I want to pick your brain a little bit more and try and relate it back to the teachings that I'm familiar with. And I want to emphasize the original goodness again, because it's so important to keep coming back to that. Especially when I talk about Evagrius and Cassian and these old-timey people with these old-timey words that didn't mean back then what they mean now, and it's all confusing. One of the examples is demon. So for us, demon definitely just means like a little devil, but in Greek the word daimon, in Koine Greek in that time period, it just meant essentially spirit, an intermediary spirit between the gods and human beings, some kind of thing like that. And so angels would be daimons. Angels are daimons. And Plato had a daimon who he spoke to in his mind, who told him what was right and what was wrong, like his conscience. And it was a little voice that spoke, and he talked about it in his books. So the word demon, even, we don't want to demonize the word demon, because we have this idea of demonizing being this bad, terrible thing. Whereas I think when we talk about the 8 thoughts, the eight demons is what Evagrius would usually call them. It's almost like an IFS kind of thing of calling them spirits.
Yeah.
And right, and saying, okay, so we have these different spirits inside of us that have these different desires and orientations and ways that they can go wrong. And when you were talking, I was thinking Evagrius must have been a 1, because he categorized all the different ways that human minds go wrong and systematized them, and then came up with solutions to them. And categorized, I think, 380 something thoughts with individual methods to heal them.
Wow. Yeah.
Under subcategories of these 8 thoughts, and the Celtic Christian tradition took it on as another word that people don't like, as the tradition of penance and the penitential tradition, which just comes from repentance, which comes from metanoia, which means spiritual transformation. And so they took this system of the 8 thoughts, and they took the language of medicine, which Evagrius also used. So he uses a number of metaphors. Demons is his most common. But when the Celtic Christians took on this tradition, which they really did in great detail, they preferred the language of medicine. And so they talked about wounds and medicines. And in the ancient world, there was this idea in the secular medical field of humors. And so we have these different humors in us that have to be in balance, and if one gets too much, the other one gets balanced. And there's sort of four classic examples, which are hot and cold and dry and wet. And so if if something's too dry, you add water to it. If it's too cold, you add heat. And so the idea is that opposites are healed by opposites, are cured by opposites. And so you were saying that every vice, or sorry, not vice, that's my language. Every Enneagram type has a virtue. And that feels like the same idea that contraries are healed by contraries. So the application of humility is what heals pride, and the application of mercy is what heals anger, and the application of joy is what heals sadness. So by naming the opposite of the wound, we discover the medicine which heals it, and then those are the different things that all get categorized, these different medicines.
Mhm.
Does that land or resonate at all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in just to clarify for the Enneagram world. I actually, oh, there's so much I could talk about here. So we don't actually see the virtue of the type necessarily as the opposite of the type in a way where we bring it in, but the virtue is almost like the fruit of the practice. So the virtue is like what organically, like if I tried to be humble, I'm not going to be humble. Like it's my affected ego. Oh, humility, like it's like that idea. And even though I say that, yes, so this spontaneous, grace-filled expression of the heart that was bound by its passion opens up into its virtue would be a little bit more like the way that we teach it. And I want to say that again, we don't have an Enneagram image. Oh, let me see my book. There's a little Enneagram image here. If you can see that middle image, it's a circle. This is an artistic rendition, of course. But inside you'll see that there's a triangle. This inner triangle, like this is sacred geometry that we're talking about here. And the inner triangle represents, for those of us who take the Enneagram from a spiritual perspective, the law of three. So how we take the law of three is that within this law of three, this idea that there's an affirming force, there's a denying force, and a third reconciling force comes in to produce a whole nother creation, if you will. And this is how we teach non-duality within the framework of like so let's say I was feeling like my passion is distorted, like the vanity of this. And what is then I would maybe talk about an opposite of that, right? Or the way that it pushes against something, but instead of fighting vanity of like, I'm not going to care what I look like, kind of there's something about like what is like holding its opposite and
Mm-hmm.
then bringing it's a compassionate gaze would be like the third force. And in the holding of that, something new arises. Not the pushing away of the opposite, not a trying to, not a pushing away of that, but it's like that, this idea, and maybe we hold them both, but it's not the two, one healing the other so much as the third force allowing them all to belong. And in that belonging, like the transformation is had, and that integration again is like a spontaneous holding of like when the two fight we're in trouble, and so that idea of like dueling and duality um is uh is not what at least my path of Enneagram work contains. And so I want to make that distinction, but I think what you shared still applies, right? Because we can even hold that. The person who's like, I'm striving for, authenticity would be the virtue of the three, and it's like, I'm not going to make that happen. I'm not going to choose that over this. But if I hold the leaning into of like I think of it almost like if you look at an ocean, you're like, whoa, we can have a preference for the depths of the ocean and say, oh, the three is shallow. It's only the surface of the ocean, right? But if we say, but the surface of the ocean maybe is maybe only problematic, or the waves and all that is only problematic because it's only surface. It's not problematic in and of itself. Because if we look at it, there is no ocean without the surface of the ocean. It's all really one thing, but we've separated. So it's almost like the surface or the image of the three is part of the three, right? But it's the separation, it's the lack of integration that makes it faulty, if you will. And so in this like deep compassionate perspective everything, like Father Richard Rohr, that everything truly belongs,
Mhm.
and at the same time, if I haven't held space for my anger, like if I'm fighting my anger and trying to be serene and not angry, then it's like, then a lot of unskillful behaviors can happen or repressed anger can happen. But if I hold space for my anger, that it doesn't mean like my anger is appropriately directed at you, If I hold space, it transmutes into something more whole, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the idea that it's not in and of itself nothing alone, maybe as another would say, nothing singular, because nothing truly is singular, maybe is a way of holding it. Yeah, yeah. But I love where you're going with this notion because it feels like the heart of at least my perspective on contemplation, which is that sense. Even the words you're using both to redefine words that have had very dualistic connotations to them. That's what you're
Mhm.
talking about. Like, let's redefine demonize, right? And at the same time, there's this practicality of like what most people think of as
Yeah.
demon, but
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And
Mhm.
then the other piece of like how different language, like the language of antidote and the language of healing, can help us to, especially those of us who grew up in more punitive traditions,
Mhm.
help us to hold our own journeys with a softer gaze, And so I feel like that's what the spirit of what you were sharing is designed to like hold this in this softer, more loving
Mhm.
gaze. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the third piece that you were talking about in my understanding of the Christian contemplative tradition would be called the mind of Christ.
Mm,
When we put on the mind of Christ, and we see from that perspective, which I think is what IFS is called self.
yeah, it's the
You know,
capital S in
yeah, yeah,
IFS.
yeah, yeah. It's the
Yeah.
same idea that there is a part of us which is untouched by sin and unafraid of the demons and
Mm,
always seeing clearly. I mean, it has limits. We always have the limits of our nature, but sees clearly within our nature what we're meant to see and what we're able to see according to what we are. And if I can switch from Evagrius to Pelagius, who also got called a heretic, surprise, surprise. He doesn't use the language of the mind of Christ, but he describes it super well, and he talks about how we have within us the hidden wealth of nature.
mm,
And so the our nature is like this fountain of virtue that
mm,
is waiting to
mm,
explode and overflow.
mm,
And it is hidden, it's covered. We can't see it. And for Pelagius, just like for Evagrius, it's the demons who keep us from seeing this hidden wealth of nature. And so our own negative thought patterns prevent us from seeing the beauty of our own nature. And as Pelagius says, the potential and the capacity and the beauty of human nature
mm,
to bring forth and to blossom naturally with virtue once we learn to deal with the patterns that are preventing us from accessing and living fully within the hidden wealth of nature, to unhide it, to reveal it. And Pelagius goes on to say that that's how, it's in everybody. And that's how all of the great in the Christian tradition, he's making a Christian defense, but he says, before Jesus came and before even Moses brought the law, we know that there were great people who did great things, and they did it without any teaching, and they did it without any law. And he cites Noah and he cites Melchizedek, and it's an ancient argument that isn't necessarily as convincing to go through lists of biblical characters for us, but the point being that it's accessible to anyone and to everyone, and it's within everyone, and it's waiting to be
yeah.
born, as Paul says, groaning with the pains of labor, waiting to be born.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, in fact, so. it's interesting because I know that, I come from a unity tradition and that there are many Christian traditions that really, um, I don't want to say look down on unity, but maybe have a superficial view of it. But the root of it is exactly what you were saying, which is this idea that we all have this indwelling Christ nature. And this is why maybe because we've kind of separated ourselves from our legacy, if you will, in a way that this idea that these old people, these dead people can't tell us, the Christ within can tell us the
Unless
truth.
it's old dead people from a different culture, then they can tell me anything they want.
Oh, isn't that
Yeah,
funny?
yeah, yeah.
How it's like, yeah, yeah,
A
I would
Hindu
say
ascetic is really cool. A Christian monk who fasts, it's like, oh, why does he hate himself so much?
got so much baggage around that I can easily say the same thing using a Rumi quote that I could not say using any of the Christian, like mistakes. But yes. So, but what you're saying is the foundation of unity teachings is this indwelling Christ nature. And you could say that put on the mind of Christ is exactly kind of what we're talking about, of like that is the lead. And from the Enneagram perspective, I use the circle to say, well, the difference is we're just not centered on the circumference of the circle where your point lies. We're centered in the spirit, which is symbolically the center. But from the center, there is a radiance, a being that goes exactly through your number. So the poetic imprisoned splendor, of like Wordsworth and other great poets who talked about like within each of us, uh, it was a Merton, a hidden wholeness within the world. There was a hidden wholeness, and so this idea, but this image, and so in my book, may I talk about my book? I feel like
Yes,
I don't want
please
to.
do. Please do. Yeah.
I have this book. It's right here. Oh yeah, I showed it earlier. Okay, the Enneagram of the Soul. It's funny, I use a Sufi parable to help. So, so yeah, it is interspiritual, but the idea that we are, and again, this is all metaphor, that we are light and we just don't know it, and we're looking outside, ourselves for it, but unleashing that imprisoned splendor. And that for me, the image is like from the center of the circle of the Enneagram, when we are centered in that, we don't lose our type, but the type becomes like the stained glass window, the particular way that the spirit that radiates from the center moves through the way you were born, this particular perspective that only you inhabit, and the gifts of your particular type, right? That they get included. So moving into, again, this more life affirming perspective of when we're not in the illusion that I am just my personality or I'm just my ego that is separate from the divine, but I move to the center and live from this place where I am now spirit radiating through the particular lens of my number. Then there are these unique ways of being embodied as me that contribute to the collective, because it comes from the one. It's like from the one for the one, which is so different from the separate self that's gonna compete for resources in the world, right? And so yeah, so I love some of the metaphors or images you have described, and really I relate deeply to the notion of illumination, of being blind, but now I see, of having a veil over what our knowing of what is true. That feels soft to me. I often quote from A Course in Miracles wisdom tradition that says, that this is a journey without distance to a home we never left, so that notion of it's right here, we've forgotten. And yeah, and then it doesn't take time and hard work and earning to get there as well. We've got it, here now. Yeah. So
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And I feel like it's sort of a natural end, and we've talked for quite some time. I don't
mm.
know, do you want to say anything else, or do you have anything you want to add before we wrap up?
um should I talk about my programming, or do
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of what I was hinting at. I wasn't sure if you
to wrap it?
wanted to or
Okay.
not. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, like I hate like marketiness, but I believe in sharing information that if someone is called to it, and they'll feel it. They'll be like, oh, this is something different. This is something I'm called to know more about. So at Evolving Enneagram, we have a program launching the September 12th through 14th. It's a weekend intensive called Contemplative Enneagram Foundations Awakening to Wholeness. So it's about starting from your type and using that Enneagram wisdom and the map of the Enneagram to support this understanding of like, what does your egoic structure actually resist or say no to, or in the bad sense of the word, demonize,
Yeah.
ostracize, exile. What does it
Mhm.
exile, right, from your wholeness? And so this will be a journey. If you're not available, it's live and interactive, but it will also be recorded. And so that this is to me like I should say I've been studying the Enneagram since 2002 and teaching it since 2006. And this is the very first year, the very first time that I am now kind of like teaching what I teach, if that makes sense. Like basically, I'm leading a certification program this year, and this first module is part of it. So it's the most intensive offering that I've given to share what I know and the framework about it, but it's also interactive for you to really be with it and engage in contemplative practices during the journey. So that's one significant thing I wanted to highlight. The other thing is I believe that spirituality, this stuff like in this modern day, we see things as like spot fixes. And I really believe in contemplation and transformation as a way of life. And that authentic spiritual community is designed to support us in this real human journey over time. And so I have contemplative Enneagram practice groups that have been meeting. We'll be going into our ninth year, consecutive year together now. And it's fall, mid-September is when we open another 12-week series to allow for new folks to join in. And so you could just find everything on the website, but that we do 20 minutes of centering prayer, and then we share from, oh, based on my type, this is what I'm navigating, or this is what I'm working on, this is what I'm exploring. And so evolvingenneagram.com is where you can find that.
Yeah, and I'll
And
definitely put that in the description for anyone who's looking for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and again, it's like there's so many things out there, I understand. So many frameworks, and the Enneagram is a complicated one, but it is for me the most transformational one I know, which is why I left church ministry to do Enneagram full time. So it really, I've seen it help people when they're stuck in a rut of like, why isn't my practice opening up for me? Like, why, like I'm dutifully engaging my spiritual practice, but I don't know why something's stuck. And oftentimes the Enneagram can be a helpmate in
Hmm.
that. So again, it's only if you're personally called to it, I think people know and they'll feel it and such. So thank you for this opportunity to share about my passion in the good sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In the modern sense of the word.
The suffering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we'll have another talk someday, and I'll talk about how ancient understanding of suffering and passion was really about a loss of freedom, but we can not don't have time to unpack that right now. And also, you're radiating from the center thing. That's like definitely an ancient sacred geometry symbol that I've read in the Evagrius. I can't remember if he uses that one specifically. Dionysius does. Eriugena does. And there's a whole lot of stuff that relates to what you were saying with that. We could have a lot of fun comparing the spokes of a wheel symbol with the Enneagram. I bet it'd be interesting to pair them together. But those are all thoughts for another day. I enjoyed this very much, and yeah, we'll see you around, I'm sure. Take care.
Blessing.